Notation systems in any language, and particularly in music, refer specifically to a family of instruments or even to a particular instrument. The more precise, coherent, and descriptive the system, the more specific and limited the relationship between the notation and the instrument becomes. These simple observations have become so self-evident in the era of computer languages that they hardly bear repeating except for the didactic purposes of explaining my work in music. The notation system produces a certain kind of music, the limitations of which are built into the music to be heard, and the notation system will not produce any other kind of music. There was a lot of experimenting that ended about 30 years ago based on the hypothesis that space equaled time in musical notation. These were experiments because in the traditional notation of Western music, space had never been equated with time except in transcription. The experiments were designed to determine if musicians could learn to read space as time. The experiments were not a failure. Apart from the simple fact that an experiment cannot fail, it may be shown to have been inadequate, misdesigned, or specious, but it cannot fail. Even the metaphorical use, such as the use of the term experimental to apply to musical notation, the results were spectacularly successful in teaching musicians that what they knew was not all of what could be known. Western music had reached a state of arrogance that was an embarrassment to everybody. Even to discover that space could not be related to time in notation was a great achievement spiritually for us all. What largely got thrown out or put aside for the time being was space as a notational ingredient. But what accrued as a result of everybody using the word space as a part of a musical idea was gradually the realization of the importance of space as a simple physical reality found apart from time, which notation had more or less been forgotten for its importance since the 18th century when concert halls were designed to make concert hall music sound like concert hall music. It is surely no coincidence for a musician that John Cage proposed that space equals time in notation during the same decade that architects discovered that they couldn't design concert halls anymore. So now we have space as a fully distinct concept in music, as exploited in the extraordinary works of Alvin Lucier and many others, and separately we still have time, which we still haven't fully come to grips with. One might observe that as a result of these experiments, a result entirely unforeseen, I think, while the experiments were being carried out, there was a kind of retrenchment. Composers got scared. Indeed, I know that many composers feel that a form of reaction came into music rather suddenly around 1970. The so-called lost 60s are, of course, not lost at all. They exist in the file cabinets of composers everywhere in America. What is lost is the musical thrill of the ideas being thrown around and the continuity between those ideas and what is happening now. The reaction came as return to traditional notation. When the reaction happened, composers were very divided among themselves as a group and divided within themselves as individuals, and there was actually a lot of suffering of feelings and political bitterness. One feared that we were on the road to old-fashioned modernism where one generation violently replaces its predecessor. I was personally scared, but in the last 30 years that seems to have healed. I see more diversity now than I could have ever imagined when all the experimenting started, so the experimenting was definitely a success. But we still do not have a notation for what we have as music. We invented a new kind of music in many forms, but we did not get a notation for it. As regards notation, we are about in the situation of the computer linguists who, for some reason or another, invent languages that cannot be commonly read among computers. We all know the most distinctive qualities of the music that is important to us now. We know how these qualities differ from what was important before and may become important again. We know extraordinary things, but we are unable to communicate them in a general way. We cannot generalize about them. We can offer an enormous number of specific examples: David Behrman, Philip Glass, Alvin Lucier, Gordon Luma, Pauline Oliveras, Terry Riley, Blue Jean, Tierney, Paul D. Marinas, Peter Gordon, Maggie Payne, David Rosenboom, Fast Forward, Tom Hamilton, Sam Ashley, Chris Mann, all friends of mine. The Names could go on to 1,000 without getting into differences among the works of any composer, but we cannot generalize this knowledge in a notational system. Thus, we shouldn't look for child prodigies in our time, and equally, we're all dizzy about what's going on. Personally, I think this is wonderful. I have an instinctive sympathy for anarchy at this moment, which I trust to be some form of self-preservation that I should take seriously. In the meantime, though, I have to compose music. That is, I have to figure out some way of writing things down so that I can have them around long enough for them to form themselves into some weird organism that didn't exist before but gives me a lot of pleasure. That's why I do it. I am bypassing entirely the question of communicating with another musician and focusing on the question of communicating with myself so that I can think. Nothing that I say then has anything to do with writing music that other musicians can read. I am usually happy with teaching people what my intentions are by making the sounds myself, or with the idea of preserving the music historically. I think that I am being honest to say that I am not interested in sounds that I will not be able to hear because I will not be around, or with the idea of contributing a model for other composers. And I will try to say as simply as I can how I write music. So this is where it gets boring because it's just about me. I write words like these. I write notes to myself about how these words are to sound. I write words until there is a story. I write opera, period. Problem starts in how to make sounds out of words. My attention shifted strongly about 30 years ago to a barely recognized resolve to get words into music in a way that pleased me. Musical fact was that I liked all kinds of new music that was just instrumental, but when I heard the use of words in my own work and other work, I didn't like it very much. This way of saying it makes the feeling sound more hostile than it was. I am just trying to explain how I discovered this need in myself, why the sudden shift was strong and the resolve barely recognized at the same time, and why I have not been able since to let go. I haven't written many purely instrumental works in the past 20 years. Some instrumental works have been recorded that were intended to be heard in the presence of voices, but were not. They were composed to be able to stand alone as a kind of code, but that is hard to explain. The technical problem, as every composer knows, is that as a result of electronic amplification, the sound of speech has gotten much faster. We're able to get to the point of the sound word much quicker than in the past, and we are increasingly impatient with the tempo of meaning that was designed to be heard in huge or small acoustical chambers. Good side is that sound of speech lends itself to an enormous range of speeds, and even better, almost everybody speaks, as opposed to playing the flute, for instance, so we are definitely deeply into the vernacular. I am trying not to make a distinction yet between speech and singing. Practical result is that now increasingly we are able to teach ourselves and other people to make sounds out of words that are very exciting musically and that we don't have a way of writing down on paper. I read about 30 years ago in the newspaper that Bell Labs had officially given up on the possibility of speech synthesis. Research was being discontinued for the time being. Even if this news was a military intelligence ploy, lie. One's first reaction was, well, it's about time. Note this is spoken sotto voce. Who needs talking machines when there's so much to be said among humans and there is so little time? So let's just think of speech for a moment as very fast singing, or more generally, very fast music. Let us appreciate the sound of the flute for its natural speed, the sound of the piano for its natural speed, the sound of the synthesizer, etc., and the sound of speech for its natural speed. Imagine hearing that sound, just a sound divorceable from meaning, but more agreeable and thrilling when not divorced from meaning. Forgive for a moment whether that sound can reach the heights of late Beethoven or Bud Powell. Be generous. Just think of the sound of speech in its abundant manifestations and be content that the pleasure of hearing those sounds has been given to you. Then examine the speech carefully with your ears as though you were a composer of music, and note the great similarities to every one of the formal aspects of music that we so cherish, its variety of pitch, inflection, dynamic range, information rate, everything else. Note, too, that in speech you think in the language of music, e.g., you were conscious of, for instance, dialect, or how the sounds differ from what you expected. There are so many examples that every choice is a truism. The kid on the street corner with the box is listening to something that he obviously really appreciates. He dances, smiles, and sings along, every sign of a real and deep musical experience, and you can't understand a word, but the music is nice. You talk to somebody from another dialect and you can't keep your mind away from the pure musicality. A madman on the street rants to himself and you experience music. Finally, you start hearing yourself like the person who must figure out what he or she looks like in motion in order to become a dancer. You have become a musician. Sorry, I've really got into explaining too much of this idea. Transformation of attention that I spoke of before can come from any direction. Of course, it can occur to humorists, crackpots, very serious composers. It cannot occur to people who have a tin ear. At the risk of boring even myself and not being able to finish, I have to tell an anecdote in order to give credit where credit is due. Transformation occurred to me because I found myself in a period of about 12 years in the presence of an amazing group of people who could really talk, the infamous and now legendary Once group. Might have happened to me anyway, but historically it didn't. Between the years of 1957 and 1959, the concentrated period, we talked every day and every night in various combinations for many, many hours. Gordon, Mooma, Jackie, Mooma, Mary, Ashley, Ann Ware, George, Manny Pelly, Betty Johnson, Howard Borkin, Milton Cohen, Joseph Ware, Cynthia Liddell, Dick, Nick Bertoni, Blue Jean, Terry, and a bunch of other people who either had less stamina or just had something better to do. And I should mention among the great ones who didn't live nearby, but who were cherished as guests, Alvin Lucier and Mary Lucier in particular. I could hardly exaggerate the obsession with talking that developed as a virtuosity that everyone in the group became conscious of. I didn't cause it. It just happened in front of my ears, and I was there. Luckily, unlike many bands that break up after the first successful concert or rehearsal because everybody in the band thinks that he or she alone got the key and something has to be done about it quick, nobody in this group was particularly interested in exploiting the mutual musical experience because everybody had something else more important to do. So it was just pure fun. And as one result of the pure fun, the ongoing of it became extremely sophisticated. The Once group could do solos of any length, the most amazing dialogues, and finally, preferably all at the same time. Because so few of them were affected by musicalism as a profession, there was incredibly few affectations of style. Joe Ware, for a while, tried a kind of stuttering, but everybody made so much fun of that bad idea that he stopped. The emphasis was on ensemble sound and ultimately on speed. The whole thing sounds sort of sentimental now to think of it, but in truth I have found very few people since Bill Farley, Sam Ashley, Jacqueline Hubbard come to mind, who have thrilled me so much with the sound they make when they talk. It sounds like singing to me, and of course Jackie and Sam sing too. A transitional anecdote is that one day I talked to Ann Ware for 14 hours straight. Mostly she talked and I listened. I noticed that around the 7th hour, she repeated verbatim a very long idea that she had said hours earlier. This is a transition in that what developed in the Once group technique could easily reproduce what might be called ranting, but without any of the fear that comes when you suspect that the person you are listening to is out of control. The legendary Once group learned to make the sound of ranting simply as one part of a huge vocabulary of sounds and a huge repertory of performance pieces. Eventually, we broke up. I'm not sure what the other people in the group took from the experience except the joy, but for me, as a musician, I was permanently changed. I had finally found what music is for me. I rested for a few years. I really needed it. And then I realized I was a new man. And like the old joke, like the new man in the old joke about the man who stopped drinking and became a new man only to discover that the new man wanted to drink, I picked up right from where they had left off. I didn't have the Once group, but I had the idea. jump ahead in time to what's been going on for the past few years, the real operas with a plot such as it is. Thank you, Mr. Rockwell, and fuck you too. 2 hours a year for the past 22 years on average. 22? And I'm just beginning to get the hang of it. I age, but I don't grow up too bad. I got the technique of these pieces through a fascination with involuntary speech. I mean specifically the speech of people who are, for worldly purposes, out of control and doing it only for themselves. It happens all the time. It happens to all of us, I think, some of the time, and to some of us all of the time. It is associated with sickness and real suffering. I don't mean to romanticize those parts of the phenomenon, but musically it can transcend sickness and suffering, and formally it is astounding. I watched the tendency in myself. I studied. I watched it in other people. I thought about it as music, thanks to what I'd learned from the once group. It is the one thing that the once group did not do, because it is impossible to fake. The ear is so untrickable in certain things. There's an area in human behavior whose boundaries are clearer than I would have imagined. In this area, speech and singing are inextricable. You exit the area in one direction toward the simple goal of making sense. You exit in the other direction towards making music. In the academic study of music, this area is acknowledged but treated gingerly. In the mythology of music as a sublime human activity, the mysterious area is more highly and honestly regarded. Its importance is fully understood, even if the mapping is not complete. In involuntary speech, the speaker is solely concerned with how effectively what is intended as meaning comes out as sound. This involves not only moving words around in their order as in literature, but also moving sounds around as in music. In its tamest form, we rehearse the tone of how the conversation is to begin, even as the telephone is ringing. In a more complicated form, we rehearse a joke or an anecdote without any scheduled intention of sharing it with another person, as if simply to come to understand it better. The plot thickens when we start explaining our motives to ourselves with an honesty that can never be shared with another person. In the extreme, we stop hiding this amazing urgency to make sounds. Then the sounds take you away. A structural analysis of involuntary speech would produce a thick book that with a slight change of jargon could be mistaken for a book on music theory. To take a simple example, in involuntary speech, there are no rules about efficiency, no rules about wasting other people's time and repeating yourself. Repeating yourself is the essence of the activity, to do it often enough until the effect has been accomplished, as in music. Another part of involuntary speech, very important, is that the action and its motives are simultaneous. It is entirely unpremeditated. It cannot be rehearsed. It is without caution or discretion. In involuntary speech, we all experience one of the deepest mysteries of music and all great athletic achievements, incidentally. The action that can be accomplished only at full speed, the action that is prepared and trying again, but never realized except in execution, the action that can be understood only in retrospect because total involvement of being is required and there is nothing left of us to stand aside and observe. We are at one with ourselves. We are heedless. Get back to the question of notation. Improvisation is a without which in composing music in a traditional style. Try at the piano to get something down that is in your head. Try again, make a few notes, try again, keep adding things, most of the time hoping for the best, but without knowing in which direction the best is to be found. Try again, recognize some form emerging, make a few mental notes about the form. Try again, keep adding things, etc. This is not technically improvisation, but there is no other word for it. In fact, it is exactly the activity of involuntary speech. Go into your studio, lock the door, composer at work, sit down at the piano, blank paper on the stand, same process, same pain, get something nice to listen to. Poof, you're a composer, Lenny Bruce. Try this on the street with words. Notice how the traffic avoids you. Keep an eye peeled for the police. No wonder there should be no musicians or poets in the ideal republic. Difference is, those pencil marks on paper are your excuse. Problem is, those pencil marks on paper are musical notes, and sometimes musical notes just won't do. Another kind of composing is to make a plan and stick to it. Stick to it is the important part. I mean a plan that instructs the performers but doesn't control the piece, doesn't control what the listener will hear. Some composers are very fond of this approach because the plan can seem so beautiful. I've tried it a few times myself, but my imagination gets away from me. I have performers out in the desert, miles apart, with dozens of automobile horns each and some sort of keyboard that can handle the high amperage of the car horns, each performer making up patterns that are a kind of message to the other players miles away and who can barely hear the signal and who are making messages themselves. This is a violation of the environment. My imagination gets away from me. Miles and miles of desert are violated by the sound of hundreds of car horns, miles and miles apart. Very beautiful to the listener, probably hard on the lizards and insects and birds and mammals who were presumably happy before the music started. But it is a plan, and were I of that persuasion now, I would stick to it. This kind of composing has a name, but I have forgotten what it is because it doesn't lend itself to telling a story. Sorry, I got off the track. Scene 2, go into your studio, lock the door, composer at work, slump around the studio, muttering things to yourself. Make yourself a drink, make yourself another drink, let the words come out, let the story come out, let the sounds come out. Who's running this show anyway? Finally, something begins to emerge. Makes sense. It's a different idea at the moment. Make a few mental notes about the form. Try again. Keep adding things, etc. It is the activity of involuntary speech. It is the activity of composing as we know it. Same as in social speaking. You are talking to someone about something. You open your mouth and something comes out. You are as surprised at the meaning as is the other person. If the meaning is not what you hoped for, what would convince, what would make you sound intelligent, what would make you sound interesting, socially, you revise immediately. Try again. Among the great speakers, lawyers in front of a jury, preachers in front of a congregation, success is called genius. Some have it, some don't. Of course, there are guidelines. What you are talking about, away from about, just won't do. Statement: the role of the United States government in support of the arts is pathetic and primitive. Response: the ermine is a very dirty animal. In itself, it is a precious bedsheet, but it has no change of linen. It does its laundry with its tongue. This just won't do. The surrealists were onto something. Finally, then, same process, same pain. There is the text or libretto for the opera. It is a song. It has many voices or characters. The room is filled with people all singing beautifully. You are technically insane, but that's okay. The door is locked. The composer at work now. What? The pitch range is typically an octave. Who knows why? The rhythm is beyond the capacities of notation. Actually, it's not. But if you take the pains to try it, two things happen. One, you distort the rhythm and try to make it fit. You distort it because the conventions of rhythmic notation make you think it is what it is not. You want to make it readable. Strong habits, thinking, eating, drinking, smoking, are not to be changed without extensive rehabilitation, which at the moment you don't have time for. And who would help? Who would you turn to? The League for Composers? You revert to the iron rule of intelligibility. You exit the mysterious area where speech and singing are inextricable in the wrong direction. You have given up on music in favor of speech. You should go into politics where the speech is written, rewritten, agreed upon, memorized, read from the teleprompter. Pitch range and pitch speed are a problem solvable above in electronics, but not solvable in the habits of the listener. We are used to imitations of the pitch change of speech at very slow down rates. Starting with Monteverdi, they say the Europeans began imitating the pitch change of speech at a slow down rate because the pitch change of speech was so beautiful and because otherwise it could not or would not be heard. Note that here we have a sociological problem. The rich and the poor, etc. Note, too, that British music hall pitch change never slow down, and the British still like it. Note, too, that musicology, to the contrary, Monteverdi, is always played at half speed. Historically, then, the musical potential of half speed became a big deal. Put aside intelligibility, put aside urgency of plot, put in embellishment, put in Maria Callas and Patsy Cline and Billie Holiday. They must have listened to each other's records with admiration. Put in Elvis and Lennon. Put in everything we know up to the recent African-American thing where nobody understands the words except after many hearings, the African-Americans. But it doesn't work for me. I love all the above, maybe more than you do, but the ideas are not discursive. The ideas are symbolical. She's got a ticket to ride the whole song, and there is only one character, so you can't enact a story. It can be told, Dylan, if the listener has the patience, but there are no characters on stage. It is a wonderful form. Actually, the characters blossom in your imagination, but there are too few of them to satisfy one's imagination of the moment when one's life is changed. So pop music is not opera. It is too short and the characters are too few. Put aside the Irish and Jewish newcomers, Broadway musical parody of America, really intelligible. Straight ahead parody of the American dream. Comedy, Lloyd Webber, it'll be around forever. I don't like the howling. I don't like the vibrato. I prefer the old Saturday Night Live. Harmony doesn't matter except for where you come from. 41 tones to the octave, great. 1 tone to the octave, great. Just intonation, great. Unjust intonation, great. Chinese opera, you have to be Chinese. First time you hear a mariachi band, you think they're playing out of tune. Those Mexicans. You hear 20 mariachi bands, one of my records, they're all out of tune in exactly the same way. They must be hearing it differently. Maybe it's me. Country music, impossible to imitate. Try it for yourself, not in public, please. European conductor won't conduct American orchestras. They don't play in tune. Harmony, it comes from the music. It comes from people making music together. When it's right, it's right. Everybody knows. Can't be said in words. Forget the books. They lie. Well-intentioned but provincial. From a time before we all knew each other and how different we can be. Keep the speed of speech because it is so beautiful. Keep the pitch range of speech. It can be exaggerated if you can do it without sounding like British music hall. Let the microphone take care of the details. Keep the urgency of the storytelling. Then you have become a character. You could be in an opera like me.
I didn't know what I was doing.
Mama?
Is that my face?
Mama?
Brother?
Mama?
Oh, brother. I couldn't help myself. Where's the body?
Mama? 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 Mama?
But where's sister? Where's sister?
The gangster sister says, crack, baby.
Jesus? It's me. Isn't it? Jesus. Sister, we really have to know. What's that smell? How far will the smell go? Sister.
And the little sister goes, ooh, 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 ooh.
Mama?
Daddy?
Mama?
I wasn't myself.
Mama?
Baby.
Mama?
Big sister says you're the kind of person I always wanted to love.
Daddy, 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 Daddy. Jesus, that's me. Don't you see? Jesus. Sister, sister, we have to know, which way does the wind blow? Sister.
Mama? Mama?
Who? I couldn't. Who betrayed who?
Mama?
Brother? Oh,
Mama?
brother. I wasn't myself. Am I my brother's sister?
Mama? Mama?
But
Mama?
where's sister? Where's sister? The gangster sister says, blow, baby.
Jesus, there's nobody else but me. Is there? Jesus. Sister, we have to know, how long will the wind blow? Sister.
Mama? Mama? Mama?
Daddy?
Mama? Ma? Mama?
Did I become you? You got nobody. You got
Mama?
nobody but me. Baby,
Mama?
baby.
Mama?
Big sister says you got to make everybody come.
Daddy, 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 Daddy.
And the little sister goes, ooh, 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 ooh.
Sister, has sister turned blue yet?
Anonnaの人と一緒にするなんて意地悪するよずるい人。
Foreign sisters say
意地悪ね。
chicky, chicky, chick, chick, gag, oh, oh, chee, chee. And the little sister goes, ooh, 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 ooh.
The Death of My Father by Steve Martin. In his death, my father, Glenn Vernon Martin, did something he could not do in life. He brought our family together. After he died at age 83, many of his friends told me how much they loved him, how generous he was, how outgoing, how funny, how caring. I was surprised at these descriptions. During my teenage years, there was little said to me that was not criticism. I remember him as angry, but now 10 years after his death, I recall events that seem to contradict my memory of him. When I was 16, he handed me down the family's 1957 Chevy. Neither one of us knew at the time that it was the coolest car anyone my age could have. When I was in the 3rd grade, he proudly accompanied me to the school tumbling contest, where I won first prize. One day, while I was in single digits, he suggested we play catch in the front yard. This offer to spend time together was so anomalous that I didn't quite understand what I was supposed to do. When I graduated from high school, my father offered to buy me a tuxedo. I refused because my father always shunned gifts. I felt with my refusal that somehow in a convoluted, perverse logic, I was being a good son. I wish now that I could have let him buy me a tuxedo. Let him be my dad. My father sold real estate, but he wanted to be in show business. I was probably 5 years old when I saw him in a bit part at the Cardboard Theater on Melrose Place in Hollywood. He came on in the second act and served a drink. The theater existed until a few years ago and is now fully defunct and, I believe, a lamp shop. My father's attitude towards my show business accomplishments was critical. After my first appearance on Saturday Night Live in 1976, he wrote a bad review of me in the newsletter of the Newport Board of Realtors, where he was president. Later, he related this news to me slightly shamefaced and said that after it appeared, his best friend came into his office holding the paper, placed it on his desk, and shook his head sternly, indicating a wordless no. In the early 80s, a close friend of mine, whose own father was killed walking across the street and whose mother committed suicide on Mother's Day, said that if I had anything to work out with my parents, I should do it now because one day that opportunity would be over. When I heard this remark, I had no idea that I would ever want to work anything out with them, that in fact there was anything to work out at all. But it stewed in my brain for years, and soon I decided to try and get to know my parents. I took them to lunch every Sunday I could. I would goad them into talking. It was our routine that after I drove them home from our lunches, my mother and father, now in their 80s, would walk me to the car. I would kiss my mother on the cheek, and my father and I would wave or awkwardly say goodbye. But this time, we hugged each other, and he whispered, "I love you," with the voice barely audible. This would be the first time these words were ever spoken between us. I returned the phrase with the same awkward, broken delivery. As my father ailed, he grew more irritable. He made unreasonable demands, such as waking his 24-hour help and insisting that they take him for drives at 3 a.m., as it was the only way he could relax. He also became heartedly emotional. He could be in the middle of a story and begin to laugh, which would provoke sudden tears, making him unable to continue. In his early 80s, my father's health declined further and he became bedridden. There must have been an instinct about when the end is near. As we all found ourselves gathered at my parents' home in Orange County, California, I walked into the house they had lived in for 35 years, and my weeping sister said, "He's saying goodbye to everyone." A hospice nurse said to me, "This is when it all happens." I didn't know what she meant, but soon I did. I walked into the bedroom where he lay, his mind alert, but his body failing. He said almost buoyantly, "I'm ready now." I understood that his intensifying rage of that last few years had been against his death. and now his resistance was abating. I stood at the end of the bed and we looked into each other's eyes for a long, unbroken time. At last he said, "You did everything I wanted to do." I said the truth. I did it for you. Looking back, I'm sure we both had different interpretations of what I meant. I sat on the edge of the bed and another silence fell over us. Then he said, "I wish I could cry. I wish I could cry." At first, I took this as a comment on his condition, but am forever thankful that I pushed on. "What do you want to cry about?" I finally said. "For all the love I received and couldn't return." He had kept this secret, his desire to love his family, from me, from my mother, his whole life. It was as though an early misstep had kept us forever out of stride. Now, 2 days from his death, our pace was aligning and we were able to speak. My father's death has 1,000 endings. I continue to observe its messages and meanings. He stripped death of its spooky morbidity and made it tangible and passionate. He prepared me in some way for my own death. He showed me the responsibility of the living to the dying. But the most enduring thought was expressed by my sister Melinda. She told me she had learned something from all this. I asked her what it was. She said, "Nobody should have to die alone."
My sister lives in the most active haunted house I've been in. It doesn't freak my sister out at all that bad, or me for the most part, because we both grew up in a haunted house, so we're no strangers to the unexplained. When it comes to my brother-in-law and the kids, it's a different story. Within 2 weeks of moving in, my sister saw a full-bodied apparition standing in the dining room. It was an apparition of an older man wearing a large brimmed hat and a vest. 2 weeks later, my brother-in-law saw the same man, and he didn't take it as well, considering he was petrified of ghosts. It happened again to my brother-in-law about a month later, only this time the man that was standing in the entryway to the house and could be seen through the screen door looking out. He stayed in his car until my sister got home. My brother-in-law is no coward and is quite dangerous in a brawl, but I think he draws the line at things he can't punch. My sister and brother-in-law acquired the house from friends of theirs who were the previous occupants. They approached them and asked them if they had experienced anything strange while they lived there, and they responded with, "Did you see the man?" Obviously, the prior occupants had seen this entity quite regularly to give such a matter-of-fact response, like it was an old friend of theirs or something. I was oblivious to these happenings until my sister and brother-in-law told me about them. I became intrigued and offered to check it out, considering I was going to be at their house anyway to help hang shetrock. When I got there, only my brother-in-law was there, and he told me about the footsteps that had recently started. I used to do ghost hunting as hobby back in the day, but in all that time, I never heard ghostly footsteps. I was a little excited, to be honest. We started cutting and hanging shetrock in the kitchen when suddenly I clearly hear someone walking around right above my head on the second floor. I looked at my brother-in-law with a smirk and said, "Are you serious, dude?" He responded with, "It happens all the time now." A chill went up my spine, and we went back to work, all the while listening to the unmistakable sound of heavy-footed walking and shuffling above our heads. To be honest, I wish I had recorded it. It just kept going and going. Suddenly, the footsteps and shuffling stopped, and it stayed quiet for 10 minutes. Then we heard a slamming sound that shook the floor. This rattled us both. The only thing that could have made that sound were two old, heavy, wooden sealer doors outside. I told my brother-in-law we have to check it out. Understandably, he wasn't a huge fan of the idea. My main concern was of chance that someone broke in to steal stuff, so I grabbed a claw hammer and I told him to just back me up if things get real. I'll be honest, my hands were shaking when he pulled the sealer doors and made the descent into the musty old basement. We searched every inch of the basement, but there was no one down there, at least that we could see. Again, I got a chill up my spine and got the hell out of there. That was my first experience in that house.
I'll be reading a story that I read to my 1-year-old niece. And this is a story that's very common in a Muslim household to be told, even if it's not specifically this book that's told from, but it's told in different ways from many different generations before. There are 3 different terms that this book will talk about, and I would like to give explanation of them beforehand. So the first one is Quran, which is the holy book of Islam, and then the next word would be Allah, which is the name of the God that Muslims worship, and the third one is the word Bismillah, which means in the name of Allah. So my first book about the Quran, Teachings for Toddlers and Young Children, by Sarah Khan, illustrated by Ali Lodge. The Quran tells us, in the beginning, only Allah was. There was nothing else but then. He created everything. Allah made the heavens. Allah made the earth. Allah made the sun and the moon, the stars and the sky. Allah made the mountains and the trees, the desert and the seas. Allah made the creatures we can and cannot see. He created angels and jinn. He created people and made them all special. Allah made every animal, the beautiful little bird and the strong, magnificent lion. Allah wants us to follow His rules. He sent books to tell us what to do and prophets to show us how to act. He wants us to be good to one another. He wants us to care for our parents and family, our friends, our neighbors, the orphans, and the needy. He wants us to be thankful for everything we have and say Bismillah in the name of Allah, and to look after our world and everything in it. Allah wants us to worship Him alone when you grow up. He wants us to pray 5 times a day. Allah wants us to fast in the month of Ramadan. Allah wants us to give money to the poor if we can. He wants us to go for Hajj and visit His house in Makkah. When we are adults, Allah wants us to get married and have happy families. He wants us to have children and raise them to become good people who believe in Him. When we die, Allah wants us all to go to paradise, where we can have everything we want and where we will live forever with those we love. The end.
Lullaby by W.H. Auden. Lay your sleeping head, my love, human on my faithless arm. Time and fevers burn away. Individual beauty from thoughtful children and the grave proves the child ephemeral. But in my arms till the break of day, let the living creature lie, mortal, guilty, but to me, the entirely beautiful. Soul and body have no bounds to lovers as they lie upon her tolerant, enchanted slope in their ordinary swoon. Grave the vision Venus sends of supernatural sympathy, universal love and hope, while an abstract insight wakes among the glaciers and the rocks, the hermit's carnal ecstasy. Certainty, fidelity, on the stroke of midnight, pass like vibrations of a bell. And fashionable madmen raise their pedantic, boring cry, every farthing of the cost. All the dreaded cards foretell shall be paid, but from this night, not a whisper, not a thought, not a kiss nor a look be lost. Beauty, midnight, vision dies. Let the winds of dawn that blow softly round your dreaming head such a day of welcome show, eye and knocking heart may bless. Find our mortal worlds enough. Noons of dryness find you fed by the involuntary powers. Nights of insult let you pass, watched by every human love.
A Little Bit of Soul by the Orangutan. It's a winter month, but I don't feel the cold that whistles through the house, sending dust spiraling in darting, dancing gusts. I stand alone, looking down at the woman lying in her bed. Her eyes are closed now, the faint traces of a lingering smile in her face. Whether this is due to a last happy dream or the beginnings of rigor mortis, I wouldn't know. I would love to say the former. Cause of death, hypothermia. The poor old girl had lived on her own since her husband passed, with no kids to come and visit. Before her hip had gone, her guilty pleasure had been the odd game of bingo, but the random weekly draw had drawn to a close when she couldn't get around as much. Only the occasional visits from her friends at the church had carried on to give her something to look forward to. As I turn to leave, I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The raven black looks good on me, I think. Stylish, in a somewhat Presbyterian way. But the collar is always too tight, a reminder perhaps of my servitude. I glance back at the old lady. At least she has gone to a better place now. The prayer for the dead has been said. Her immortal soul has left its mortal coil. Case closed. Next job, so soon. Ah well. No rest for the wicked. A young driver has stolen a car and I give chase. He's driving like a maniac, swerving in and out of the traffic. At any point he could lose control. I always wonder why some people do this, what thrills they get from driving this quickly. It happens fast. The front tire blows and the car slides sideways, then flips. A raucous cacophony of tormented metal and glass, the vehicle spins and rolls in balletic carnage, ending up on its roof. Golden sparks shoot out across the road like a firework as the steel grinds across the asphalt, leaving a bloody smear behind it. Mercifully quick. One easy job. Death by dangerous driving. I've been watching this one for a while now, but I have time. The man in the smart suit has spent some time looking out over the city. He clings to the tall chimney, tears streaming down his cheeks. For what reason, I don't know. He stepped closer to the edge, looking down. From this height, the fall would certainly kill him. I understand the desire to end, but why this way? I approach him and he turns around, still crying. I have no words for him. Nothing that will take away his pain or make him feel better. He jumps. Maybe he will land in a friendly place. It's morning now for some people, but what does it matter? I enter a grocery store. The shopkeeper is being held up by a masked man holding him at gunpoint. I stop and watch, but no one notices me, intent as they are on their own predicaments and petty misdemeanors. "Where's the safe?" the masked man yells. The shopkeeper stays quiet. "I will blow your head off, old man!" The shopkeeper goes for the bat under the till. The masked man dashes past me and I walk around to the other side of the counter. A pool of blood is flowing its vicious finality across the floor, the old shopkeeper left staring blankly up at the ceiling with his one remaining eye. There's little I can do other than watch and wait as he takes his final breath. Murder. It happens, and always will. I need a break, but I don't seem like I'm going to get one anytime soon. I sit in the chair looking at the old woman in the hospital bed. Her husband sits beside her holding her hand. Bashed over the head because she wouldn't hand over her purse, it only had a picture of her dead son and a small amount of change. Was it worth holding on to? To her it was. The health monitor flatlines, its long, slow monotone presaging death at an end, and her husband looking up in disbelief, his thoughts mirrored on his face. Medical staff rush into the room and try their hardest to resuscitate her, working their hearts out for many minutes, but to no avail. In the quiet and lonely aftermath, I walk to the side of her bed, her soul's eyes open, and she smiles at me. It's not often that happens. I place my hand on hers and smile back. "I always wondered," she says, the ghost of her words whispering into my ears. "You look a little different to how I thought you would. Are you ready to go?" I ask. She nods. I sever her soul from its mortal cage. She stops to brush a ghost of a kiss across the cheek of her grief-exhausted husband and rises to the glow above her. Another day, another death. The prayer for the dead has been said. The soul has left the body. Rest in peace. When will it be my turn to rest? I'm different now, so different from the being I used to be. I've been known by so many different names, many lost in the mists of human time, gone like the humans who believed in them. Gone too is the scythe, and the flowing cloak, the gloom, the skeletal form. The mirror never lies. A man to those of you who see, dressed in raven black, tie, suit, shoes, shirt, although the collar of the shirt is always too tight for some reason. Tall, distinguished and calm, the silver scissors that sever, secreted in a jacket pocket. No scythe to terrorize with apocalyptic dread. Not yet. Only when the fires fall from the sky and the dead rise will I truly know an end. That will not happen yet, so I continue, endlessly, while you believe I endure in the form of current belief. I long for the sanctity of death and end, but that cannot happen while you are all still here, believing and dreaming of your sad little ends. Your demises mean little to me. One day I will know rest, but until then I will be there at every cessation of life. If you see me, you will know me, for I am death, and it will be my pleasure to meet you.
It is my first morning of high school. I have 7 new notebooks, a skirt I hate, and a stomachache. The school bus wheezes to my corner. The door opens and I step up. I'm the first pickup of the day. The driver pulls away from the curb while I stand in the aisle. Where to sit? I've never been a backseat waste case. If I sit in the middle, a stranger could sit next to me. If I sit in the front, it will make me look like a little kid, but I figure it's the best chance I have to make eye contact with one of my friends, if any of them have decided to talk to me yet. The bus picks up students in groups of 4 or 5. As they walk down the aisle, people who were my middle school lab partners or gym buddies glare at me. I close my eyes. This is what I've been dreading. As we leave the last stop, I am the only person sitting alone. The driver downshifts to drag us over the hills. The engine clanks, which makes some of the guys in the back holler something obscene. Someone is wearing too much cologne. I try to open my window, but the little latches won't move. A guy behind me unwraps his breakfast and shoots the wrapper at the back of my head. It bounces onto my lap. A ho-ho. We pass janitors painting over the sign in front of the high school. The school board has decided that Meriwether High, home of the Trojans, didn't send a strong abstinence message, so they have transformed us into the Blue Devils. Better the devil you know than the Trojan you don't, I guess. School colors will stay purple and gray. The board didn't want to spring for new outfits. Older students are allowed to roam until the bell, but 9th graders are herded into the auditorium. We fall into clans. Jocks, country clubbers, idiot savants, cheerleaders, human waste, Eurotrash, future fascists of America, big hair chicks, the Marthas, suffering artists, thespians, goths, shredders. I am clanless. I wasted the last weeks of August watching bad cartoons. I didn't go to the mall, the lake, or the pool, or answer the phone. I have entered high school with the wrong hair, the wrong clothes, the wrong attitude. And I don't have anyone to sit with. I am outcast. There's no point looking for my ex-friends. Our clan, the Plain Janes, has splintered and the pieces are being absorbed by rival factions. Nicole lounges with the jocks, comparing scars from summer league sports. Ivy floats between the suffering artists on one side of the aisle and the thespians on the other. She has enough personality to travel with 2-packs. Jessica has moved to Nevada. No real loss, she was mostly Ivy's friend anyway. The kids behind me laugh so loud, I know they're laughing about me. I can't help myself, I turn around. It's Rachel. Surrounded by a bunch of kids wearing clothes that most definitely did not come from the East Side Mall. Rachel Bruin, my ex-best friend. She stares at something above my left ear. Words climb up my throat. This was the girl who suffered through brownies with me, who taught me how to swim, who understood about my parents, who didn't make fun of my bedroom. If there is anyone in the entire galaxy I am dying to tell what really happened, it's Rachel. My throat burns. Her eyes meet mine for a second. I hate you, she mouths silently. She turns her back to me and laughs with her friends. I bite my lip. I'm not going to think about it. It was ugly, but it's over, and I'm not going to think about it. My lip bleeds a little. It tastes like metal. I need to sit down. I stand in the center aisle of the auditorium, a wounded zebra in a National Geographic special, looking for anyone to sit next to. A predator approaches. Gray jock buzz cut, whistle around a neck thicker than his head. Probably a social studies teacher, hired to coach a blood sport. Mr. Neck says, "Sit." I grab a seat. Another wounded zebra turns and smiles at me. She's packing at least $5,000 worth of orthodontia, but has great shoes. "I'm Heather from Ohio," she says. "I'm new here, are you?" I don't have time to answer. The lights dim and the indoctrination begins. The first 10 lies they tell you in high school. 1. We are here to help you. 2. You will have enough time to get to your class before the bell rings. 3. The dress code will be enforced. 4. No smoking is allowed on school grounds. 5. Our football team will win the championship this year. 6. We expect more of you here. 7. Guidance counselors are always available to listen. 8. Your schedule was created with your needs in mind. 9. Your locker combination is private. 10. These will be the years you look back on fondly. My first class is biology. I can't find it and get my first demerit for wandering the hall. It is 8:50 in the morning. Only 699 days and 7 class periods until graduation.
I write these words from a place of hopelessness, to honor a man who had great hope. I'm struggling to think and to speak about my friend Chadwick Boseman in the past tense. It doesn't make sense. The news of his passing is a punch to my gut every morning. I am aware that we are all mortal, but you come across some people in life that possess an immortal energy, that seem like they have existed before, that they are exactly where they're supposed to be, here, that seem ageless. Chadwick was one of those people. Chadwick was a man who made the most of his time and somehow also managed to take his time. I didn't know him for long, but he had a profound effect on me in the time that I did. When we came together to make Black Panther, I remember being struck by his quiet, powerful presence. He had no airs about him, but there was a higher frequency that he seemed to operate from. You got the sense that he was fully present and also somehow fully aware of things in the distant future. As a result, I noticed that Chadwick never seemed rushed. He commanded his time with ease, and he put in the work with all of us. He showed up to every rehearsal and training and shoot day with his game face on. He was absorbent, agile. He set the bar high by working with a generosity of spirit, creating an ego-free environment by sheer example, and he always had a warm gaze and a strong embrace to share. His large hands would descend on my shoulders and give them a squeeze that relieved me of the tensions I didn't realize I was holding. Chadwick's hands were strong enough to carry the weight of the film and free enough to clasp mine when I needed it. He was impeccable with his word. I never heard him complain, and there were definitely things worth complaining about. He understood the power of words and chose to manifest power through his word. He used his mouth to build, to edify, never to break. And he used it to tell some regrettably lame dad jokes. He practiced not going against himself. He seemed to really love himself. He expressed who he really was, even when it meant he didn't smile when you thought he should. He accepted himself, and perhaps that's why he was so capable of loving so many so deeply. And he used his body in every way that he could. He did his own stunts, drummed at his own parties, danced many a night away, mastered martial arts. The list goes on. He loved, honored, and respected that body, doing more with it than most. In doing so, he took the risk to be alive, fully alive. So it seems that it was life that gave up on Chadwick long before Chadwick gave up on life. When I was around Chadwick, I wanted to be better, less petty, more purposeful. He was fueled by love, not fear. He moved quietly, deliberately, and without imposing himself or his ideals on others. And yet, he also made damn sure that his life meant something. He was unwavering about that. He cared so deeply about humanity, about Black people, about his people. He activated our pride. By pushing through and working with such high purpose in the films he chose to commit to, Chadwick has made the infinite his home. We are all charged by his work as a result, by his presence in our lives. His power lives on and will reverberate for generations to come. He used his life force to tell meaningful stories, and now we tell his. Chadwick's death is something that I can neither take in nor take in my stride right now. Perhaps with time. I'm going to take my time, and in his honor, I promise not to waste my time. I hope you will do the same. My deepest condolences to his family, friends, and to his loving wife, Simone, from whom I heard this phrase articulated so resonantly. Take your time, but don't waste your time.